The chair, Mr. Pagan, will not be in today. So, morning, everyone. Hope everyone is having a great October. This is October 27th, meeting being called to order. Madam Susan Houseclaw, Secretary, can you please call the roll?
Hi, good morning. Okay, Aspira of Florida.
Can you also call the representative that should be attending
Oh,
the agency as well as the
okay, I sure
representative?
will. That agency is vacant. IET in action, vacant.
One second, I just,
Okay.
I can't hear Mr. Oswald. I heard 1 second, but I didn't hear what he said.
sorry, I just let some people into the room.
Okay, we can certainly just wait for a few minutes and let people come into the room as it is a hybrid. I apologize. I was getting right for it because I'm ready for the topics today. So my apologies.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, now you can go ahead. I let everybody in.
Okay, you want me to start at the top? Aspira of Florida. IET in action. Black Chamber of Commerce of Palm Beach County, which is vacant. CARD at FAU, Carrie Whittle.
Present online.
CARD at FAU, Sabrina DeGoyas.
Terrence Reed, Urban League of Palm Beach County.
We haven't got to you, Mr. Reed.
Okay, hold
I'm
on,
so
hon.
sorry.
Okay, Coalition for Black Student Achievement, Myra Levy Bazemore. Compass, Amanda Canetti. Compass, Rex Barnes.
Present.
District ESC Advisory Committee, Carla Donaldson. District ESC Advisory Committee, Kimberly Spire-O.
Present online with Rocco, so I will mute myself.
Division of Blind Services, Caesar Vigo.
Caesar, yeah, he's here. I don't know if.
Oh, I see, he's waving. Okay, present. Economic Council of Palm Beach County, Craig McKenzie. I can't see them, so. El Sol Jupiter, Suzanne Cordero. For the Children, Reggie Durandis. Gold Coast Down Syndrome, Sue Davis Killian. Guatemalan Mayan Center, Mariana Blanco.
Present online.
Good morning. My name is Sabrina DeGoyas. I'm sorry I missed roll. I'm present online.
Thank you. Haitian American Solidarity Center, which is vacant. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Palm Beach County, Maria Antuña.
Good morning, everyone. Present online.
And Hispanic Education Coalition of Palm Beach County, Dr. Gabriela Mendez.
Present online. Good morning.
Good morning. Palm Beach Council of PTAs, Dr. Cassandra Corbin Thaddeus.
Present.
Thank you. And Palm Beach Council of PTAs, Charmaine Postal.
Present.
Palm Beach County Human Rights Council, Emmy Kinney.
Present.
Puerto Rican Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Palm Beach County, Juan Pagan. Puerto Rican Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Evelyn Vargas. Tri-City Education Committee, Mary Evans. Tri-City Education Committee, Eddie Rhodes. Urban League of Palm Beach County, LaTerrence Reed.
Present online.
Great, thank you. And West Palm Beach Chamber of the NAACP, Marcia Guthrie. And West Palm Beach Chamber of NAACP, Rachel Mondesir. Okay, she and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 11, got enough. 12.
So, Madam Vice Chair, we have enough for a quorum.
Perfect. We have a quorum, and so at this time, we will proceed to the approval of August minutes. The minutes was distributed by email. I'm pretty sure they are also distributed in person as well, or they have them available in the room. So at this time, I'll entertain the approval of August minutes. Are there any questions regarding the minutes before we seek a motion to approve? Or hearing no questions, do we have any anyone who would like to motion for the August minutes?
I motion to approve the August minutes.
Thank you. That was Mariana online. Motion to approve August minutes. Is there a second?
I second Dr. Gabriela Mendez.
Thank you, Dr. Mendez, for that second. Those minutes will be, well, let's go through the process because the district have a different protocol of the way we should approve minutes. So all in favor of the minutes being approved as presented?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved unanimously. Public comment. We are at the time for public comment. If there is anyone online, we will start with the person that's online first for public comment and then proceed to anyone in the room. Mr. Oswald, if you can share if there is someone in the room.
There is no one in the room, just, we also have just legal representation, Ms. Morgan, as well as Mr. Houchins, who will be presenting shortly, as well as Ms. Simmons and Ms. Hoskoff. And, oh, Mr.
Thank
Stewart.
you.
Sorry, I didn't see you over there. Pete Stewart, how can I ever?
Thank you
Any
so
public?
much. And if-
so-
Go ahead.
So online, when we were going to have this meeting and
Ms. Mendez? Ms.
Yes.
Mendez, is there someone that you see that's a public comment? Because are you a member?
I am a member
She is.
representing the Hispanic Education Coalition, but last time I wrote an email asking to add a topic in the agenda. And I
Okay,
was
we can,
that it could be, instead, it could be treated as a public topic. So I don't know if I should present it now.
I was not here, but I'll go ahead and if there is no objection from the committee, because typically public comment is a designated time for public and not members of the group. Any topic that would be discussed normally would be discussed during new business for someone who is a member of the committee. But prior to entertaining the topic that you would entertain, which you would have 2 minutes, I would allow a public person, if they are on this call, who would like to speak first, given that it's a public comment section. Is there any public comments, or is there anyone from the public that would like to speak at this time? Hearing none, are there any objections to Ms. Mendez presenting for 2 minutes? Hearing none, proceed, Ms. Mendez. Dr. Mendez. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So I just wanted to share that, and maybe I was told new topic instead of public. I'm sorry if that was the case. I just wanted to remind this committee that on November 2nd, the district is having a meeting to give a name to the new high school 000. And the Hispanic Education Coalition and a lot of the members of the community are suggesting, are promoting the idea of naming the school after Dr. Joaquin Garcia. Because Dr. Joaquin Garcia was a member of this committee. Actually, I'm taking his place here, big shoes to fill. But I would like to propose that this committee sends a letter to the board, to the school board, supporting the naming of the school after Dr. Joaquin Garcia. I wrote a brief letter so we don't have to do the work. I have it here and I can share it with you if you want, now or later. And I would like to ask if everyone is in agreement with that. Send a letter in support of naming the school Dr. Joaquin Garcia.
So thank you so much. And as the vice chair, I can say that back in, I want to say January, if not February, for sure, the last term, we did bring out a motion to support naming the school after Dr. Joaquin Garcia. So that would not be a problem with the letter. And we supported bringing the suggestion to the board, but there was a process, and that was in February 22nd. They sent us something back saying, the conversation regarding naming the school in the February meeting. So
But
I
Ms.
don't think
Postle, I just want our legal counsel to jump in here, because the role of this DDC, this type of recommendation would be out of scope. As individuals, and legal can weigh in here as well.
It was not a recommendation to the board. It was support of naming the school Dr. Joaquin Garcia. Legal came and spoke to us back in February and said the same thing, but they said we can certainly support. It wasn't a recommendation. It wasn't something that it wasn't an action from the board. It was, we are in support of naming the school. And I think we could be in support collectively as a group. We could be in support of anything. But it was not a recommendation.
That would require a motion from the entire group, because I don't know how each individual may or may not feel about that. And it is also, after consulting with legal, out of scope of the role of the DDC. There's another policy that governs naming of schools, which is not part of this process. So, Ms. Morgan,
I hear
don't know if
what
you
you're
wanna-
saying, Mr. Oswald. I'm just simply alluding to what we discussed back earlier this year. Legal was there when we made that motion to support the Hispanic Coalition, one of the agencies that is represented on here. I'm just sharing the context back when we discussed it, and legal was there to correct us when we said we wanted to bring forth a recommendation. We were told we couldn't bring a recommendation, but we could support the Hispanic Coalition. That is what we were advised. And that's when we made that motion. And I just recently spoke to it and shared this with a board member when I attended last month the meeting at John I. Leonard High School, or it could have been earlier this month. The months are a blur. When I attended the meeting earlier this month, I actually pulled out that expert from that meeting. So I'll be glad to go back and refer that, but I'll let legal speak for the sake of time as well.
And this will be a letter, and the first word is support. So that's what I'm suggesting, to send a letter of support to the board. That's it.
Okay, Ms. Morgan's going to jump in here. She's just working on the mic. No, I can't hear you.
Is it green?
Oh, yeah, she's going to a different mic. Is that one green?
There we go. Okay. So just as Mr. Oswald stated, it is beyond the scope for the committee to make that recommendation. However, individuals are more than welcome to attend the board meeting and speak to board members regarding their support of naming the school.
As individuals, not as a collective, even as under a support.
Correct. So you're more than welcome to go and say that you're a member of the committee, you're representing your organization, and this is, what you are supporting. But as in terms of sending something to the board, that would be beyond the scope of the committee.
As it would still need a recommendation even for support.
Correct.
I'll look at the policy and review the wording of the policy. That doesn't make sense, because we just did something very similar back in February, and you're telling me if legal, I'll look back and review and send an email. If not today, definitely tomorrow, because that does not make sense. I understand it. Again, I keep hearing recommendation. This is not a recommendation. And if this committee agreed to write a letter of support in regards to one of our agencies, in any respect, we should be able to write that letter of support. Back in when we were dealing with the George Floyd incident, we were able to write a letter of support as a collective.
Ms. Postal,
group.
I'm sorry to cut you off. So the difference with this situation would be that there is a standing board policy that dictates
There was a policy.
the steps for naming of schools. And so there is an entire process that the school district and the board goes through in terms of naming of the schools. So you'd have to read both of those policies together.
Right. No problem. I'll follow back up for the sake of time. Ms. Mendez, Dr. Mendez, you certainly have my support, and you have the PTA support, and I will entertain the hands that are raised, because I won't go back and forth, and I'll pull back what we discussed back in February. Ms. Kimberly, then Ms. Antuno, then the members that's in the room.
Are we able to, with the people present, request that that the, I guess the committee staff release the contact information for the individuals here who approve it, and so that Dr. Mendez can reach out to us to sign on individually and with whatever organizations we represent. She may not have all of our contact information, but are we able to maybe put our hands up and those who have agreed give her our contact information? I don't know if that would violate any policies, but I know that you wouldn't release it without our permission.
So because we wouldn't be taking action here, and I'll have Ms. Morgan weigh in here, I do not believe that would violate any sunshine, correct? To release.
Because this is not in the scope of the
to release
DDEC.
email, like, information, so if people wanted to sign on to a letter with Dr. Mendez in support as individual organizations, not through the DDC, we could provide, and discussing that, because we're not taking action here, would not violate sunshine. And it's public information, so yes, we could do that.
Okay, I'm putting in the chat my contact information, so you can send me an email with your, just write your email address there if you want, and I'll send you the letter, and you can change it, or you just can sign it and write the name of your organization and sign it and send it to the members of the board. That would be excellent. This is just a gesture of support. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So So you're going to type, she just put it into chat, so I put it up here for those in the room. G Mendez at nova.edu.
Yes, you can send me your email address there, or you can just write it on the chat and I'll copy it and send it.
So I'll spell it out. G, even with my glasses, GMENDEZ at nova.edu. And I think you have another hand raised, Ms. Postal? Ms.
Yes, I recognize Ms. Chun. Yeah. After. Yes, I recognize.
Yes. Thank you. I pretty much the same the lines that was just asked by Kimberly. I want to make sure that I can personally, under my organization, because the letter has been sent under the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, I signed the letter that I did not cross any boundaries or did not do anything I wasn't supposed to do because it came from the Hispanic Chamber, not under this committee.
Correct. You
Correct.
did not violate any sunshine.
Okay.
We're gonna
Okay,
keep
thank you.
everybody honest here. We're gonna talk about sunshine today too. So,
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Are there any questions in the room?
Hi,
Can
my
I-
name is,
ahead.
sorry, my name is Cesar Vigo from the Division of Line Services. I just put my email information, so if you want to share anybody with me, the organization goals or visions, or how we can cooperate with them. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for, or are there any comments in the room? And then for my last question, I
none.
would like to ask, just action, and then we can go ahead and move forward. Asking legal and Mr. Oswald, what are we considered? Are we considered community? Are we considered an employee? What are we considered here as a collective, the body that's before you? What are we considered?
the District Diversity and Equity Committee is an advisory committee that's governed by a board policy.
No, I'm
not sure
asking
what you're
as
asking.
people, what are we considered as people? Aren't we considered community?
Yes, this policy is
Okay,
different
that's
because
all.
you list,
Right,
you
no, I'm
listed
just asking, are we considered community? It was yes or no.
organizations. You're considered organizations, and you're the rep
Are we
for
considered
specific
community?
organizations.
Well, each respective agency and agency and organization, what are we considered? Are we not considered community? Yes or no?
You're represented an advisory committee as organizations, and you want an answer to something I don't understand what you're asking.
We are considered the community. We're not considered staff. We're considered the community. We
You're
are
not
part of the
staff,
community.
correct. I mean, you're not staff, absolutely. But you're
We're
representative
part
of
of
an
the community.
organization that's listed
In
in
the
the policy.
We're okay in the community where you, because I know where I'm going in regards to the policy.
I don't know where you're going.
7.03.
I'm not sure where you're going.
Well,
So if you tell me where you're going,
we're considered community, and in fulfilling the responsibility, the board should carefully consider and respect community recommendations. But I digress. We're going to go ahead and move on to updates from Chief of Equity and Wellness. Thank you. Because let me for transparency reason, why I say this, because when we take away a support from one agency that's represented in DDEC, and I hear you saying policy, there's been other respective policies. There's academic advisory policies, there's advisory boundary policies, and we have been able to make certain recommendations or even support in crossing boundaries in those respective areas that are governed by other policies. So when you start dipping and dabbing and telling this committee where we can provide support, I have an issue with that. And this is minute, and I mean, it is big for me. It's huge for the context of the naming of the schools, right? But I just don't want it to come to the point where we're choosing when we're going to allow committees to support certain actions and initiatives And so I do want to I want a deeper dive into that, not today, but definitely a follow-up offline, because I don't want us to tell us, I don't want it to become an issue where we're going to choose when we're allowing committees to support certain initiatives, regardless. And maybe that's a problem because we're working in silos. And so that's why everyone is kind of on their own. But I digress, and we're going to move on to the updates from Chief of Equity and Wellness. So I'll talk to you offline, Mr. Oswald, and legal and whoever else.
No problem, and I'll follow up with the Chief General Counsel with Ms. Morgan and other legal to weigh in as well. So regarding updates, first thing I want to talk about, Ms. Holtzclaw emailed you out, and it's also posted in the calendar invite. There were 2 State Board of Education rules that were adopted recently, one just last week and one about a month and a half ago. So in particular, that will have some implications and interpretation. I know often we've talked about our transgender youth and how they are seen sometimes at campus. But the State Board of Ed did rule regarding field trips, and you have those where it defines really about a field trips and going into details of what must be included in a policy and procedure when announcing to parents about that. In addition, school board, and I'm going to read under section 3B, school board and charter school governing board policies or procedures must include accommodations or modifications in order to ensure that all students have an opportunity to use, shoot, I'm on the wrong one. I apologize. I'm sorry. I'm on the wrong one. I'm going ahead to the other one. I'm sorry, section 6 on the one I was speaking to regarding field trips, whether room assignments, and this is for overnight field trips, for overnight lodging will be separated by logical sex at birth. So, and so essentially we need to provide accommodations for overnight field trips and notification when announcing a field trip if lodging would not be based on biological sex at birth. So we are working on updating some procedures around making sure that our schools understand that. We started with that one. The one that was just last week has to do with bathrooms and locker rooms. In that school board and charter schools, and this is where I was in 3B, school board and charter school governing board policies or procedures must include accommodations or modifications in order to ensure that all students have an opportunity to use a bathroom or locker room separated by biological sex at birth. And an exception, and prior to that, I should have started with one, method of supervision provided by, actually this one goes in a little bit more detail. I need to back up, and I apologize, I got distracted earlier. Actually, I'm going to go under section 2, parent notification 2A. If a school board or charter school governing board has a policy or procedure that allows for separation of bathrooms or locker rooms according to some criteria other than biological sex at birth, the policy or procedure must be posted on the district's website or charter school's website and must be sent by mail to students' residents to fully inform parents. The policy or procedure must include at minimum the following: method of student supervision provided for locker rooms, for example, a coach or aide, and how that method of supervision ensures the safety and privacy of students. And 2, which locker rooms are not separated by biological sex at birth. And 3, which bathrooms are not separated by biological sex at birth. 3B, school board and charter school governing board policies or procedures must include accommodation or modifications in order to ensure that all students have an opportunity to use a bathroom or locker room separated by biological sex at birth. Exceptions, the requirements for parental notification, section 2, do not apply to faculty bathrooms that are not accessible to students in single occupancy bathrooms. So I wanted you to be aware of that. We are having internal meetings to discuss about, current state of how we make accommodations now for students and moving forward, how we'll inform our schools on procedures to ensure that they're following this State Board of Ed rule. There's a comment. So, whether or not this would be a violation of Title IX, Kimberly, so we're going to meet internally. I think if you read carefully, you got to read it a few times. It's not saying you can't do it, but if you are going to do that, you have to mail notifications, you have to publicize it, basically let everybody in that community know about that decision should you so choose, allow students to choose other than biological sex at birth. So, but we're having an internal meeting, so I don't have probably all your answers, but I want to make you aware of that. Ms. Kenny?
I have a question. I'm still a little confused about what the current standing district policy is. Because I do know that some transgender students trans kids are already struggling with access to bathrooms that they feel safe in. So as it stands now, are most schools in the district allowing transgender students to use the bathroom that aligns with their gender identity, or are they separated by biological sex at birth?
So I don't have, each situation's dealt with individually, right? So we have some bathrooms that are unisex, single, where individuals are using those. I don't know exactly, so Mr. Stewart probably has more details, but we work to problem solve each case as principals bring those up. There could be some where students are choosing to use based off their gender identity. Those are the situations where under this rule would not be allowed unless we follow those other procedures.
Okay, so theoretically, all you would have to change is informing parents that bathrooms are not always separated by biological sex at birth, correct?
Yeah, it's listed there about mailing home that notification to every family, posting it. Obviously, you could understand the noise that would probably cause in a community. Obviously, it wasn't made easy. So, again, we're unpacking it, but I wanted you to be aware.
Okay, I appreciate that. I would just highlight that the first thing it says on here is to ensure the health, safety, and welfare of Florida students, and that includes transgender students. So in order to be compliant with this law, we have to make sure that bathrooms are safe for transgender students as well, no matter what noise that creates in the community. That's all I have to say.
Absolutely. Thank you. Ms. Cordero?
Hey, good morning. I think you kind of just answered it. I was just not clear on if it's up to the school to decide how they separate the bathrooms, or if it's up, or if the district mandate. But I think you kind of just answered that.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other announcements. The district kind of kicked off its new strategic plan this past week internally, developing work teams for each of the initiatives. I had shared in a previous meeting the breakdown of the 4 themes, the initiatives around that. There is, obviously, I think there's 13 initiatives, but covering everything from student achievement, mental health, and wellness was the number one issue we heard from the community, so that has a strong presence, as well as a student-focused culture. And the last theme was under employees and having a strong talent pool for the district. So more information will be coming forth around those work groups and give more specifics to allow this particular committee to provide input on feedback on some of those initiatives. Also, the school district was approved. We had applied for 2 community partnership schools. These are a community school model that looks at not only the academics, but the whole school, making sure we provide health services for a community. And that's for Lake Worth High School and JFK Middle. So we're pretty excited. The partnerships include, you have to have 4 partners. Currently, Palm Beach County didn't have any community partnership schools. So we have FAU, College of Social Work. There is Healthcare District, who's a partner, and Children's Home Society, who really took the lead. They're kind of have a big presence with community partnership schools in the state of Florida. And so we are working through that process, pretty excited about that. I'll give updates in the future, but we have 2 planning grants for both of those schools. In addition, it was approved by the board for Project Lift, somewhat similar, Project Lift at Westgate Elementary School. Project Lift is with Boys Town. It's, again, going deeper, additional support around providing a lot of support around community needs and student needs. And so currently they have we're going deep. We just started as well, a person who's from from Boys Town, working on a needs assessment to provide additional support and services for that community. Also, last month, we had a great meeting on Black excellence. Strongly invite you all to attend Black excellence. There's a lot of overlap, and some of you have heard from Dr. Robinson in the past and Ms. Postal about some of the initiatives and work that is going on currently. There's a number of work groups there that are bringing some recommendations back for December 19th. So December 19th, it will be a face-to-face meeting here in the boardroom. If you haven't been involved, there is no online anymore. We're going back to face-to-face. To allow for, obviously, a safe conversation around that. Last month, we had a group that responded to recommendations from a work group around restorative practices, student voice, as it plays into Black students in our district. And again, the lens is always Black students in this particular group. So again, December 19th, 5 o'clock here at the school district. And in addition, okay, and Ms. Simmons will send you an invite too, so you have more information on that. So, and I did workshop. I know we lost the meeting last time because of Hurricane Ian, but I did present to the school board on the DDEC policy that was well received on recommendations. That was also posted on updates on that. There was some feedback that I'll be following up. We'll have first development for that particular policy. I believe it is later this month. So hopefully it'll be adopted with some of those changes that we've been discussed for some time back in January. So that concludes my update. So I went a little long on that, Ms. Postal.
Nope, no problem at all. Moving right along, updates from, any questions for Mr. Oswald at this time? Hearing none on the call, any in the room? At this time, we'll move forward to the updates from the subcommittee on district trainings.
Thank you, Chairman Postal. I'd first like to recognize we have two members that would like to join the subcommittee. And I'm not sure if they need to be voted upon. It would be Mariana Blanco and Sabrina De Goyas. Is there, can anybody just participate or be added on, or do they need to be voted in or anything?
They need to be voted by the larger group, so you need a motion.
And then I would also add then Cassandra Corbin Thaddeus as well. So
Did
those
not-
three individuals.
Did we vote in the past on this?
I
Oh,
don't believe
No.
I stand corrected.
Who is the second person? I know Mariana is in. All three are. I know Ms. Thaddeus, Dr. Thaddeus, as well as Mariana are both on the committee. Is the second person on the committee? I didn't hear that name. That name didn't sound familiar.
Sabrina De Goyas is now the new alternate at FAU Card, and I believe she was just brought on the committee as a member. I'm not sure actually if that was voted upon by the board. I know the paperwork's been in, but I'm not sure if that was put through by the board yet.
Yes, she was approved by the board.
Okay. Then it would be those three individuals. Dr. Thaddeus, Mariana Blanco, and Sabrina De Goyas.
I can't make the motion. I almost started to make the motion. I can't make the motion, but
I guess I was clarified by legal, we don't have to have a motion to add additional members, so I stand corrected.
oh, okay.
Okay, perfect. So today we discussed, since we had a lot of new members, we kind of went back to a lot of the vision of what the subcommittee focused and how we should proceed. And we had discussed quite a bit about supporting this larger committee with topics and information that comes up regarding whether it's the strategic plan and various information that gets put out through that, such as the equity analysis tool or policies, things like that. Also, if I know Mr. Oswald will be talking about bullying, how the committee might be able to support further with trainings related to that. So I do apologize, my internet went out towards the end, so I wasn't able to, we weren't able to finalize any of this stuff. But the committee, the aligning of the subcommittee to this larger committee is something that we discussed, and we thought it would most likely be one of the ways we could best support by doing sometimes maybe a further dive into some of the information that's being put out. Was there anything else that I might have missed that anyone else on the subcommittee would like to add?
I think you pretty much
I'll-
touched it.
Okay,
I'll just jump in because I did somewhat
absolutely,
participate a little bit this morning.
absolutely.
So part of what I would support is that, bullying keeps coming up. Obviously, it's a big issue for a lot of our students. It has a lot of different legs, a lot of different trainings, requirements, initiatives behind that. So statutes behind it to kind of unpack and educate the larger group about statutes, what we do, what's required by statute, what we do as a district to work to address this issue, some data behind it, and then get your feedback from there about where to take that forward. So potentially, I know we're not there yet, but potentially if this group wants as a topic for the larger group, right, we're in, what month are we in? November's meeting. And then from that, you provide feedback where we go to help address that, because it would definitely be helpful to hear feedback. You hear a lot about bullying through your respective roles, and feedback on how we can improve that issue for our students to feel part of the school community would be very worthwhile, I think, of our time.
Thank you. Was there anyone else on the committee or who attended the meeting that had any other further comments? Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Postal, you want to move into new business? Oh, wait, where are we? Unfinished. Oh, I kind of talked about this unfinished business. And Ms. Postal, I'm going to move forward. I don't know if you signed off or if we just turn your camera off. I can't see everybody. But again, did present the DDC policy. One of the recommendations, just to update you, the NAACP West Palm Beach. I did hear from the leadership at the Florida level on that organization, and they recommended to remove that as they are not active at this time, and to replace with NAACP South County. In addition, the board had us looking, we had brought forward a recommendation to look at the foster care and a couple organizations. One we had discussed, they wanted to take a deeper dive to look at a couple other organizations that also support students in that space. And then also the board brought forth the recommendation to add a representative, so add additional organization around students experiencing homelessness. I know we had that discussion here. But to look at organizations that would be recommended for that group as well. And so we'll be bringing that policy for development, I believe, in November, later this month. Any questions on that?
I have a quick question, Keith.
Yes.
So for that NAACP South County, we're not looking right now for a representative. We're just saying that we want to put forth that organization with the South County. Is that what I'm understanding?
Correct. And I'm going blank on her name, that represents the state. She did reach out and said that organization would be interested in providing a name once we get to that point.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No questions on that. I don't know if Ms. Postal, if you're there. We'll go ahead into new business. So with us today, we have the data extraordinaire, Mr. Paul Houchins. So one of the things we haven't talked about is really our academic results, right? And it's definitely called out in our policy, how are our students doing, and look at the particular subgroups. So Mr. Houchins is going to give you an overview and results of assessments from last school year. Oh, there you are, Ms. Postal. And I went into new business. You good with that? I see a shaking of the head. All right, I'll take that as a yes. All right, Mr. Houchins.
Good morning, y'all. Thank you for having me today. So as Mr. Oswald said, we're going to go through the 2022 state assessment results, as well as some of the work we've done with the master board scheduling, particularly in the secondary space, middle and high school. And obviously we can stop at any point for questions, discussions. We're looking at this kind of disaggregated, but all of the data are available on the research and evaluation website or the data tool site that we're going to go through, and there's links in the actual deck that I can share with Mr. Oswald after the fact. This is actually also all taken from the instructional review that was done with the board, so it's actually publicly available there as well. So looking at the FSA results from last year in ELA, I think we all remember 2021 was pretty much a large drop for a lot of our students in a lot of our grade levels. In general, that drop kind of leveled off or bounced back somewhat for most of our students in a lot of cases. This here, broken out by Black, Hispanic, and white students. Going from left to right, it's a little hard to see on the screen, but you're looking at 3rd grade through 10th grade, in English Language Arts FSA results. The light blue bar is 2019, pre-pandemic. As we know, the 2020 tests were suspended because of the closure of brick and mortar schools, and then 21 was our blended learning year, the first return, and then 22 was last year when we were getting a little bit more back into normal. Also the last year of FSA. We're moving into the FAST and the BEST standards this year. So as that data rolls out throughout the year, we'll also be reporting on that, out on the research and evaluation website. So, you can see, again, essentially, I'm not going to read out all of these numbers. Again, we can link to them on the dashboard as well. But, fourth grade ELA for our Black students actually rebounded quite substantially to where they were pre-pandemic. Again, a lot of our other grade levels kind of stayed where they were in 21. Seventh grade came back up a little bit. Ninth grade as well returned to actually higher levels than pre-pandemic in terms of students scoring on grade level or higher for our Black students. For Hispanic students, again, similar trends. Fourth grade, you had a decent bounce back, and then some places kind of stayed the same. And then white students, again, same pattern, but as we're aware, there's gaps that we're trying to close as a system that remain, and they're working towards that this year. Flipping down this again, now looking at the same data for English language learners, students with disabilities, and students on free and reduced lunch. Again, in a lot of cases for the ELL students, there was more bounce back across all grade levels for those students. Students with disabilities, again, similar patterns to the other subgroups, Black, Hispanic, and white in terms of a lot of return to where we were in fourth grade and some of the higher grade levels, and then some stability between 21 and 22 in others. And then students on free and reduced, again, similar patterns to what we saw with anyone else. Any questions on ELA before we move on? Because I figure we can do this in chunks because we've got ELA math, science, and social studies.
Can you just clarify for the group the test that was used and what the changes are happening?
For this last year to this year?
Yeah. And
perfect, can do.
Because it's important people understand the changes in the standards. And
Certainly. So last year was the last year of the Florida Standards Assessment, the FSA. That was sunset and replaced by the Florida Assessment for Student Thinking, which is FAST, because you know how we love acronyms. And it's also assessing a new set of standards put out by DOE, the BEST standards, benchmarks for educational student thinking, I believe, or exceptional student thinking. And so we're transitioning into a new assessment. So I don't know if y'all were involved in 2015, but we had the same kind of transition in 2015 when we went from the old FCAT standards to the FSA standards, and now we're going from FSA to BEST. It's just a realignment to what the current thinking coming out of Tallahassee is in terms of, standards and instruction and assessment. The other massive shift that is, a change from what we've done at the state level going back all the way, is they're going to 3 assessments a year, 3 progress monitoring assessments a year. So we concluded the fall, the first week in October, and we're working on those results and getting those results out to schools and interpreting them. Again, it's a brand new assessment, brand new set of standards. So this year is definitely a learn as we go year because there's not a lot of guidance and little to no historical information to use to kind of make judgment calls as we go through. But we'll have the second window for that in December and early January, at which point we'll start to see student trajectories within the year. Students who may have started out lower and are showing improvement through the year as they learn and are taught more of the content that's being assessed. And then the third progress monitoring window is essentially the same as we've seen historically. It's going to be the larger scale summative assessment for the year. But again, same, new standards, new content. This year's scoring will be kind of tied to last year's just because there's no new standard set. The process at the state level is Once this year's scores are in place, they'll convene standard setting committees, educators and community members from around the state, to say, what should a third grader know and be able to do? And that's where they'll start setting the standards, and we'll see kind of the new alignment to what the state's new expectation is starting next year with the results. So any questions on the, last thing. And that change is for English language arts in 3 through 10, math in 3 through 8. The science and civics assessments and U.S. history assessments stay the same standards. There's not a change in standards in those areas, and just a test at the end of the year. So we'll be continuing with those assessments the way we have historically. And then for the algebra and geometry end of course tests, the test process is staying the same, so there's just still an end of course test. There's no progress monitoring in algebra and geometry, but the test is shifting from the old standards to the best standards. So the best standards cover language arts and math. The new progress monitoring system cover 3 through 10 language arts, 3 through 8 math, for the, as well as some progress monitoring, additional progress monitoring data in K to 2. And then algebra and geometry, again, new standards, but still the old kind of test model where there's just one assessment at the end of the year. And again, this is now looking, instead of 3 through 10 only, we're looking K to 10. But there's not necessarily yet an alignment between the K to 2 and the 3 to 10 assessment because they're both brand new. We've not done K to 2 before. K to 2 is actually in an existing platform. It's Renaissance is the vendor and STAR is the assessment. They've been around for quite some time, so there's that, but there's no current discussion of that being incorporated into accountability of any kind. And I'll stop because I just said a lot to see if we have any questions on the transition or discussion on the transition before I move on into last year's math.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, so just to have an idea in terms of the number of tests that our students are imposed on. Many years ago, the students have the diagnostic test and at the beginning of the year, and then they have the FCAT and recently diagnostic test and FSA. Now they're having more tests with these 3 tests. In general, let's think about the life of one student in one school year. What is the situation in terms of how much time they have to learn and how much to be assessed?
Certainly understand. So what we had historically done, for the last 7 years or so, is to have a winter diagnostic and then the FSA at the end of the year. So the winter diagnostic usually took about a day per subject area, in terms, not a full day, but 90-minute session, 2 90-minute sessions, so half day of actual testing, but they do a lot of other things along with that. And then the FSA at the end of the year, which was a 2-day test, so roughly speaking, 3 days of an assessment per subject per year for ELA and math. And this new transition reduced, at least for the first 2, the amount of assessment within each given window. So for example, as of right now, they should have 1 day of assessment in the fall, 1 day of assessment in the winter, and 1 day of assessment in the spring. So 3 days of assessment. So whereas in the past 7 years, we've had 1 day in the winter and 2 days in the spring, it's now 1 day in the fall, 1 day in the winter, and 1 day in the spring for ELA and math. So because what we've done is drop the local diagnostic in ELA and math because it's being replaced with the state mandated progress monitoring assessments.
Thank you.
So at the individual student level, the testing is about the same. The lift on the district has shifted because we have now 3 windows instead of 2.
Dr. Corbin Thaddeus?
Yeah, I have a maybe a different question that you can help me understand.
I can try.
Okay, and this is so because the tests have shifted, right? It was FCAT, it was something else, and wherever we are now. How we are describing and determining proficiency has also shifted. That language as a 3 has also shifted. And
Somewhat.
Okay, so it's shifting. And I guess my issue, or that I want to see if you have some thoughts around, is how are we understanding proficiency? And is it accurately really reflecting proficiency? Or is it just kind of falsely alluding to your proficiency? And I'm asking that because that 3 is what, unfortunately, many of our students of color are being trained to meet, when it's actually not a high level of proficiency at all. And so I'm really concerned about the language that we're using, how we are messaging proficiency, and giving the impression that 3 is really what you should be striving for. So if you can help me with that.
I can try. So in terms of the definition of 3 going all the way back to FCAT, then FCAT 2, then FSA, and again, we don't have a definition of what 3 is going to mean, relatively speaking, for the best yet. That will happen when the state does standard setting. And again, that definition comes down from the state in terms of how they set the expectation. But while the language of a 3 has changed somewhat, like initially it was like they initially used the word proficient at 3, and then even though a lot of the discussion hasn't moved away from using the word proficient at 3, they've gone from proficient to kind of satisfactory in the definition as they shifted into FSA. I presume they will keep kind of that, based on the language they're using right now, it would imply that they're going to keep that satisfactory as the terminology of a 3. So again, not mastery, but acceptable, for lack of a better word.
Exactly.
In terms of the push, at least in the circles that I relate with at the school level and whatnot, that 3 is not the goal. The 3 is, the shoot for the stars, land on the moon kind of thing, where most of the schools that I'm interacting with on a regular basis are pushing their students to improve regardless of where they were. So if I was a 1 last year, which is obviously substantial deficits, maybe a 5 is not the goal this year, but the 5 is the eventual goal. And moving those students forward, I think that's part of the inclusion of growth in the modeling, because again, going back to the very early FCAT, it was simply a proficiency measure or a level 3 or above measure, and there was no measures for growth. And 2003, 2004-ish, they implemented the growth piece where students could show growth. And then after a few years of that, they implemented the growth piece where students actually had to be on a trajectory to get towards a higher level in that growth. So do I think they're necessarily doing it perfectly at the state level? No. But I think the push is for constant and continuous improvement amongst those students, not just to that 3, but for those students who haven't gotten to that 3, that's step 1, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I just would like us to have higher expectations of our students, because they can do it. But if we're saying a 3 is where we, expect you to be, they're going to rise to that expectation. So I think we should be saying 5. But that's kind of a local conversation. But it's important, especially because we're hearing language around mastery. 3 is not mastery. And so we're setting our students up to not be successful. So for a conversation for another time, but
I certainly
I
understand.
just wanted to be thinking about that.
And Ms. Post, I see it's commenting. I don't know if you want me to read that or if you're going to unmute.
Yes, I was going to mute. I just posted that little cute scene by Dr. DuPont, where she says, level 3 is not for me, level 5 is what I strive, and we should always be striving for level 5. If we fall short, then we could work around that. But I heard something surrounding, like, we're not striving for level 5 this year, should always be striving for level 5. And maybe that was just, I took it out of context. But that wasn't my question. I wanted to ask, how can parents identify the progress of their kids throughout the year? So those progress reports that come out, like both of my kids, I have 2 elementary level and then middle and high school. But for the elementary level, a 2nd grader and a 5th grader, the progress report has the letter M on it, which is meeting needs. So that doesn't really say anything to me. I haven't had a meeting with the teachers. I don't know what my child is doing unless I actually go in and say, what does this mean? And I guess from an equity standpoint, how do all parents know what that M means, and how to, help their kids throughout the year rather than just signing that progress report back? M means meet the needs, and that's a good thing. We don't know what that means. If you have a C, you're meeting the needs, but you could be, you could have a, what is it now? 70 is a C. You could have a 70 C, 1 point away from a D. So we really don't know what that meet the needs are. Meeting the needs are. So how can parents better, or how can either the district better help parents understand where your child is on a semester to semester or quarter to quarter basis?
So I would have to defer the question on the report cards, not kind of where I work. But the assessment piece, in terms of all of the assessments that are given by the district at the district level, so the FSQs, the USAs, also these state progress monitoring assessments are all loaded into the student information system and available to parents on the Parent Gateway. And for the state assessment pieces, there's actually some PDF descriptors of each of the available scores that would come out with that. And again, remember the PM1 is just very new, so some of this is still kind of trickling into the system because, it's less than a month old in terms of us getting through the first window and still working with DOEs on some of the, we'll call it idiosyncrasies of how they chose to do things. So for the state assessment piece, there is the scores from those state assessments. It's, a few scores per test at the content area level, like a domain or a reporting category from the old FCAT days. Their percentile rank, so how they're doing relative to other students who took the assessment, their scale score, and their current achievement level for this one. And then again, PDF linked descriptors that would help parents understand what each of those scores mean. Then for the FSQs and USAs, I believe there's also a descriptor document that kind of gives a little bit of guidance on what to do when they see those scores. But then again, like I say, on the report card side, I would have to defer that question.
I guess let me go back to this particular state in the state level. So for example, when you look at the Florida assessment of student thinking, that's a state test, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so for Florida assessment of student thinking, here's a feedback that you would get back. One of the feedbacks here, I'm looking at a parent, a screenshot with a parent asking, what does this mean? The child scored a level 1, and it says, reading, prose, and poetry at or near standard. Well, if it's a level 1, to that parent, how could you be at or near the standard if it's a level 1? What does that mean? So there's no follow-up from the, I guess, from the school regarding that. And then it says reading across genres and vocabulary is below the standard, and then reading informational text is at or near the standard. For the parent, it's like, what does that mean? What is the standard? And for that parent, and there's more parents about this.
I completely understand. That's actually one of the interesting conversations we're having with DOE, because normally, not normally, but historically, we have gotten a points earned out of points possible for that information. So like reading, we didn't have the same reporting categories under FSA, but like author's purpose, we could see that the child got 5 points out of 10. We saw numbers. How the state chose to report for PM1, and we're pushing them to change for subsequent administrations or to give us a better definition of what those three things mean, at, below, below, at, near, or above. So, to answer your question slightly flippantly, I don't actually know what those things mean either. And we're pushing DOE to give us more contextual information so that we can help that understanding. Obviously below means below and above means above, but how far below, how far above is not available to the district, the school, or the teacher as of yet. So,
And that
and then
makes sense.
just to continue along that line, along with some of the other things that's coming out of DOE that's, we'll call it less than helpful at the moment. Like that level 1, that's a spring standard level 1. They didn't do an equipercentile. They didn't do anything to say, this is what a level 1 would know in the fall. They just simply applied the scale score and thresholds. So, we've got a lot of students that would normally be at the end of the year a level 3 or higher who are sitting much lower in the scale because it's September, right? And they've got a year of learning to go in front of them. So that was a choice DOE made in terms of how they chose to score it and providing a spring leveling to a fall test. But what we expect to see when we move into the second progress monitoring window is, that student who, I'm a level 1 now because I'm just now learning these skills, but that student who is normally an on-grade level or above student will learn, right? And between September and December, the presumption is, based on how DOE is doing things, that child will go from let's say they're a 1 now, maybe they'll be a 2 in December and a 3 in, May, or a 1 in the fall. They learn a lot in this, between those first two tests. They're a 3 and then they move up to a 4 or a 5. So again, as I was saying earlier, there's a lot we don't know this year. So we're trying to support as best we can, but a lot of it, to your point on the way they're scoring the reporting categories, I honestly don't know what at or near means in terms of an instruction. Are they just above or just below? It
Right.
obviously means they're just above or just below, but what's the scale? What's the threshold? And those are things we've been pushing DOE on. I know when they initially planned for this year, they weren't actually planning to provide any instructionally usable data on the reporting categories or standards or anything along those lines. They were just planning to report a scale score, an achievement level, and a percentile. And I know a lot of my colleagues around the state and I pushed over the summer for them to provide something we could actually, I don't know how to teach a kid to be a 5. I know how to teach a kid to get better on reading informational text or understanding poetry and prose. So I know a lot of the assessment folks around the state pushed, so it could be a factor of the fact that they hadn't been planning on it and they kind of had to rush it. But that's a long way to go to say we're still trying to understand it ourselves, so I apologize for being long-winded.
No worries, thank you. Yeah, because you got 303 and here's another one that I'm looking at is 308, and one is a 1 and one is a 2. Then it's just so confusing. Two areas have at standard. It is so confusing. So thank you for that.
I can currently understand. And so the difference at the 302 and the 308, that is one thing we can explain. It is in that PDF for the parents. The threshold between a 1 and a 2 is between, I don't know what grade level you're talking about specifically, but that threshold between a level 1 and a level 2 would fall between those two numbers. That would explain the difference in the achievement level. But that doesn't help a lot. I certainly understand.
Right.
But we're pushing on DOE. We'll continue to push, and we're, hoping for improvements for progress monitoring window 2 at this point.
Ms. Posto, I didn't note around parent communication information. I'm going to get with Dr. Sheffield to see if there's some certain efforts around this that she's taking from her office as CEO and get back to the group to see if there's the potential of information we would want to share with this group. And
Thank you.
Mr. Hutchins, also, could you, as you go into the next subject area, as well as this subject area, obviously there's been a lot of discussion and headlines regarding the NAEP scores coming out. And if you all had any time to analyze how our data, we don't administer the NAEP, correct?
We don't do the NAEP at a level that we would have scores.
That we would have scores, right? But looking at those trends and how these trends mirrored as far as some of that learning loss that occurred during COVID, are we seeing similar trends that you're seeing in the NAEP, or if you had time to do that type of analysis?
So haven't really dug into NAEP at this point yet, but one of the things that we have seen, relative to other states on the state measures, I think Florida's seen a little bit more bounce back than some of the other states. Can't honestly quantify that beyond saying it's kind of just what we've seen. But particularly in math, because, again, last year was not a fun year for us in math. Year before last was not a fun year for us in math. Last year we came back a little bit. But in terms of, the NAEP comparisons, the historically when we've done analyses of, our district relative to the NAEP performance, we tend to outperform in general, but we have not gotten a chance to dig into this year's NAEP release yet.
Okay. Thank you.
So I will use that to transition into math. Again, same basic layout of structure for the scores, but what you can see here, pretty readily across the three subgroups is, we've seen a better bounce back in math from 21 to 22 than we saw in reading, but that's also because we took a bigger hit in math between 19 and 21. Again, a lot of things instructionally can kind of back, that, noticing, it's kind of harder to learn math remotely than reading type of things. And, with all the remote students we had in 21, that could be part of this. But, last year, for the most part, our teachers were in front of our students, and you can see we definitely made progress back to where we were in 19, and obviously have a long way to go to where we want to be at the end of the day. And I think a lot of that's going to be taken into account in the coming strategic plan. The one piece to just, you'll notice that 7th grade is a lot lower than all of the other grade levels. If you'll recall, our 7th grade advanced students actually take the 8th grade test. So the only students in the district taking the 7th grade test are our most struggling students in mathematics. So that's one of the reasons for the kind of lower performance in 7th grade across the board. And then you can see that bounce back in the grade level math also kind of carries over into the algebra and geometry. Again, this is ELL, SWD, and free and reduced lunch students. Again, similar patterns, with returns. Some a little bit less for students with disabilities, particularly in 5th grade. A little flatter, but in general, again, not where we want to be, but definitely kind of turning that 21 around in most cases. Any questions on math?
I have a question in general. When we look at this data, we see that we're still not in the 2019 level, which was not a good level, by the way. So my question is, what is the district doing to address these problems? And I'm not saying to address this achievement gap. I'm saying because the achievement gap tends to compare students and say, oh, there is a gap, these are doing poorly and these are doing well. I would call it, as Gloria Billings Ladson calls it, it's the achievement debt. It's the educational debt. The district is in debt with the students because it's not supporting them in the way they need to be achieving as much as they should. And I'm here, it's clear it's African American students or Black students and English language learner students. So by looking at this data, what is the district doing to address these problems?
So Dr. Mendez, I'm going to take that question because that's, you're spot on, right? So there was a lot of funding that came from the federal level to our district, more funding than we've ever seen, that we'll probably ever see in our lifetime. So about a year and a half ago, Dr. Sheffield and myself, working with other leadership principals and others, developed a student academic support plan and how we would utilize a lot of these resources to address these gaps that we anticipated coming. So within that plan, we broke it down into elementary, middle, and high, and the biggest lift of what we were doing was adding additional teaching units at targeted areas. And we tiered our schools. So at the elementary, there was a tier 1, 2, and 3. Tier 1 and 2 schools received actual human capital positions. They received the most. It was about 50% of our elementary schools, and those are the schools that had the heaviest lift based on academic achievement, free and reduced lunch, teacher turnover were some of the things that we used to tier those schools. So all the tier 1 schools received a reading recovery position to target first grade students in English language arts that goes through a specific program and training. All tier 1 and 2 schools also received an additional supplemental academic instruction program teacher to do small group instruction, a push-in to do additional small group in math and reading. They also received an acceleration position so we didn't want to just also lose the students who were still on or above grade level. We wanted to make sure the AMP programs that you talked about, we now have AMP in every elementary school, gifted programs starting in every school. Those, a position that would just focus on acceleration. And they also received a PLC, a professional learning community facilitator, so position to work with teachers to full-time job is to help them unpack this data, the stuff that Mr. Houchin's speaking to talk about the resources and pull out those best resources to address these issues. So those positions, they weren't all filled for this data because we rolled that out about, I want to say like May prior when we finally received the funds. So a lot of those positions went unfilled. Total across the board, to give you an example, and I don't want to go because I could spend a whole meeting about talking about the support plan of what we're doing. But like high school received depending on their size, most of the tier 1 and 2 high schools received 2 positions just focused on graduation. They received a position just focusing in on algebra. They received a PLC facilitator, a position that would be built into the master board strictly around English language arts, so where students were 2 or more years behind grade level and they needed a different programs such as like Wilson Reading. You can't just do Wilson Reading in an intensive reading. You need a full amount of time to do those type of interventions. And I'm missing another position that they received. In total, it was roughly 370, give or take a few, positions that were added into our schools from the ESSER funding in Tier 1 and 2. Tier 3 schools did not receive positions. They did receive, and all schools received additional tutorial dollars. I think we went over Paper, the company Paper, which does that 24/7 tutoring for all students. So there were some things that all schools got. We were strategically, even though we know there's struggling students in our Tier 3 schools, but they have the lighter lift, and we didn't want to cause, with the teacher vacancy issues that we face across the country and here locally, create a bigger issue for our most challenged schools. So that's why we didn't add positions into our Tier 3 schools. And you're probably saying, well, how are you adding all these positions? And then, after the end of next school year, the funding is gone. Because of teacher turnover and through attrition, we'll be able to absorb them into existing vacancies. So I know there's a lot, and there's other things that are happening, but the biggest piece is around we call our SAS plan, our Student Academic Support Plan, and how we're utilizing those resources from the federal government.
Can I ask a question, Keith?
Mm-hmm.
So historically, Tier 1 schools or Tier 2 schools have usually received human resources or teachers that are least experienced and least trained. I'm hoping that's not the case in the case of all the positions that you named. And so with that, I'm curious as to what was and is there a professional development plan? Like what type of what type of professional development did this extra HR body receive to go into these schools to support our students who are have the highest need? And what's the ongoing plan for that support? That's one. Then the second question that I have is, and even in this short time, have we seen any evidence that this is the prescription that we need to have in place? And have we asked our students?
So, great questions. So your first question, absolutely, so I should have mentioned that, right? So professional development around all these positions was critical. So we did add a specialist in teaching and learning under Dr. Sheffield, that their charge is to provide professional development on the best resources, best pedagogy in each of those areas. So for example, the extra SAI teacher, there was a specialist put in, that person meets and provides professional development for those individuals on a monthly basis in each of those categories. So on for example, the graduation positions, someone who's just curating, making sure, at that point, and especially last year, was triage, making sure we can graduate our kids. Best resources that would support ACT and SAT, right, to get the concordance score for graduation, things like that. In addition, what is the expectation of these positions? That we're recruiting strong teachers that would also model for other teachers at the school level. So if I'm the push-in teacher in the elementary school or the algebra teacher in middle or high school, schools have to build in time so that other teachers can go and observe some really good instruction, right? And to build their practice as well. So we're trying to do long-term capacity building. As far as the impact, right? So we're working, I think, so we are flagging all the students that are receiving that support in our student information system. I know we're trying to work towards a more robust evaluation about, are these positions making a difference with the kids that they're working with? I think that's a big lift. I don't know how much has been communicating to Mr. Houchins about that, but I know that's something the superintendent wants us to look at to see the impact of this. I will say at a broad range, it doesn't help the student who's obviously a level 1. We, fortunately, I think it really kept us from price slipping. We were able to maintain an A-level status as a school district. But I think there's a lot of the positions got filled late last year, so it's hard to measure last year. I think this year will be more cleaner. More of the positions were filled, but we still have vacancies, even the ones we currently have.
I'm going to throw out a radical thought. Maybe we could take some of our brilliant teachers from schools that are thriving, put them in these Tier 1 and Tier 2 schools, and then the new teachers that we've just hired, they could go to the schools that are thriving, right? There's a shorter learning curve. The students are doing great. We need the teachers that are doing well at these schools that are doing well in the Tier 1 and Tier 2 schools so that these students can also be doing well. Just a thought.
Yeah, absolutely. That does come into teacher contracts and other challenges. However, we did provide a financial incentive. Were you part of that, Mr. Hutchins?
There was a financial incentive.
For the schools that were rated D?
D and F, yeah.
So we didn't have any F schools, right? So we only had D. Charters. So for our district-operated D schools, there's some additional separate funding. And so we did offer teachers with a higher PYG or those who show they can produce greater results, a $5,000 incentive to go to one of the D schools. So we do try to look at, but you're absolutely right. It's difficult when you get into the teacher contract and working with those negotiations, but I couldn't agree with you more. So hopefully, I think we did have some teachers who chose.
We had a few.
Few, but not as many as we hoped.
Yeah, the state's timeline is pretty tight on that.
Yes, for sure. Okay.
I want to.
There's,
I want to.
do we have a hand raise?
Oh, wait, chat box came up, hang on.
Oh, the warning, thank you.
Okay, so I'll go fast. Where are we here? So there's math, ELL. So looking at science and social studies, again, science just kind of maintained from 21 to 22, so we're hoping to see 23 bring that back up in terms of the students are scoring on grade level. But you can see with the social studies, the 2 social studies exams we gave, we did have a bit of a rebound, again, across subgroups. Similar patterns for ELL, ESE, and or ELL students with disabilities and free and reduced lunch. So learning gains, the growth piece, and I'll go through this very quickly. Again, it's all available online, and you can obviously email me if you run into anything you want to ask questions about. But learning gains, we did see a lot more rebound than we did in on-grade level. Again, implying we had more impact last year than we had in 21. And again, there were struggles on, all levels in 21. So language arts gains, again, this was by race, and then by free and reduced ELL and SWD. Math, same data. Again, because we saw such a bounce in proficiency, we even saw a higher bounce in growth because those two things are kind of tied.
That's interesting.
Which piece?
Just the gains in math from 21 to 22?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, in ELA, in a lot of cases, just being very general across all grade levels, we dropped from 19 to 21 and then kind of generally remain stable. But students, in terms of being on grade level, we remain stable. But in terms of students actually showing growth within wherever they were, we saw a bit of a return, some growth within that. So, maybe that student who fell to a low level 2 between 19 and 21 maybe came back to a high level 2 in 22, and hopefully that trajectory will continue. Again, because, some of our students, some of anybody has had, some difficulties outside of school that might not have been able to be overcame within a year. But with math, not only did we see, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. With math, we saw a bounce back and improvement in overall proficiency. So we had a lot more students go from below grade level to on grade level. So that's going to actually, in addition to seeing students grow within either staying below or staying above. So that would be why the math was, again, even a little bit more exaggerated on the gain side of things. And again, just broken out by subgroup so we can look at it, publicly across. Any questions on test performance? Because I'm going to transition into kind of our acceleration in middle and high school. I know I'm kind of running up on time. Okay. So as I believe I've come to talk to you all about before, I know we bring it up a bit. In middle and high school, we've got a lot of work going into increased opportunity for advanced coursework and acceleration. So, in high school, we're looking at students who are getting into college level coursework while they're in high school. And in middle school, we're looking at students who are getting into advanced or high school level coursework while they're in middle school. The idea being, that exposure to rigor, that higher expectation pushes students to thrive and achieve because students typically rise to the expectation you provide for them. We kind of know that. So what we've been doing, so we started that process in high schools, and several years ago we kind of rolled it down into middle schools, and we've been in the process of rolling it down into elementaries, and this is kind of our first step into that. So basically, the ask of the elementary principals last year was to provide a recommendation to go to with students to their middle schools of what level of instruction that the elementary principal recommended. Because, as we know, that sixth grade group of kids at a middle school, nobody at the middle school really knows them. They're kind of just making judgment calls based on what courses they've taken in the past, teacher recommendation, principal recommendation, all those types of parent requests. So to try to bring that up in terms of, getting the people who really know more about the child to provide that recommendation. The elementary school principals were asked to provide recommendations for placements for their students who are rising sixth graders. So on the right-hand side here, sorry, mouse is weird. This is the recommendations, again, district-wide, coming out of elementary schools. So the green bar is a recommendation for advanced level coursework regardless, just advanced. The blue bar is advanced with support, so a push in, a pull out, some kind of support. The kind of yellowish mustard, I guess, is regular. And then for that small group of students that are on access points, or maybe they're brand new to the school, they haven't been recommended yet for access points, that kind of reddish bar at the bottom. And as you can see, we still see some of the gaps that we've historically seen in the actual recommendation piece. And I know a lot of the principal supervisors are talking to their principals about this and why this is happening. But again, this is the first year, so we don't really have a comparison. But this is, again, our master board kind of documentation. So the right-hand side can be looked at as access. What is the student's access to whatever based on the subgroup we're looking at. And then the left-hand side is the equity, the representativeness of that access. So the gray bars on the left-hand side represent the district. So for rising sixth graders, 27, halfway between 27.5% of those rising sixth graders over the summer were Black or African American, 39% Hispanic, and 26.5% white. Then the blue bar represents combined advanced and advanced with support. So 27.5% of our rising sixth graders were, I'm ringing. 27.5% of our rising sixth graders were Black. A little less than 23% of the students who were recommended for advanced or advanced with support were Black, so slightly underrepresented. Hispanic, 39% versus 36%, so again, underrepresented, and 26% or so white in terms of the enrollment, but 33% of the recommendations. So again, this is the first year we've done this, so with all of this work, we've been looking to show continuous improvement. So this is our baseline for this rising sixth grade work. So again, in between 23 and 24, we would hope to see, a more equitable distribution of recommendations than we saw this year. But considering where we started with the middle and high school acceleration work, I would say these gaps are lower than where we started with the other work 5 and 6 years ago. Any questions on this before I move on to middle and high?
Yes. Are these recommendations done by principals or by
principals?
whom? Yeah. So do we have good training for the principals in terms of implicit bias, for example? Because that has an effect on recommendations, because some principals cannot see Black students as being smart or Latino students as being, worthy of being in advanced programs or classes.
Like I said, this is the first year we've done this, and I know post this being the baseline, being the first year, I know the principal supervisors are having a lot of different discussions with the principals. I would have to defer to them on exactly what those discussions are around, but I would presume that's part of it, because I know that's a lot of what the conversation is centrally. And then, the specifics of what's going on between principal, supervisor, and school. I'm not in those conversations.
And why is it just a recommendation from, it's just a principal? Is that what you said?
Yes, ma'am.
And why is it just a recommendation from the principal?
As opposed to?
A teacher, somebody that's on, like, closer, I mean, principals, you know, the assumption is that they know their school, they know their students, but they cannot know all the students. So how are they getting close enough to students to say, I'd recommend the student for an AP or advanced class?
I believe, again, this is just advanced because this is elementary to middle. But I believe the conversation was for principals not to do it in isolation. But you know, a lot of times when we put teachers in the mix in terms of recommendations, they become the gatekeepers. So I think it was kind of keeping it central to kind of prevent that. But that would, again, would have to defer that one to people a little bit closer to the.
Well, if we're making recommendations, and I know we're not, but suggestion, it should be a triangulation. Like, if you have principals, teachers, and parents, like, I'm not saying that, you know, this is all on you, but I'm just curious, like, how in the world do we get recommendations from principals only, sounds like, I don't know, about students that they may or may not have a relationship with? It's a big school. Most schools are pretty big, 200 kids or whatever.
So the recommendations are definitely not the only decision-making point.
Okay, what else?
You know, historically speaking, you know, we're talking about scheduling of sixth graders. So historically speaking, scheduling was being done by parent recommendation or parent request, and the ideas of the middle school who were just meeting these kids for the first time. So this has been added in as kind of, to your point on triangulation, that third point, you know, the middle school's understanding of the child, the parent's request of the child, and now a third piece of data coming from the elementary school.
It's work to be done. That's all I'll say.
Continually.
I just, I mean, this data is, you know, when you have, and this is not comparison, but if there's only 26%, what's that, 26.5 represented in terms of white students, but they're more being recommended for advanced courses, like more than the population, like it just, there's something like, so we have to really look at what's happening and something is not right.
Well, I mean, this is the representativeness is the work we've been working towards.
I understand.
You know, and again, it's not that, you know, it's, you know, 26% of the district population of Rising sixth graders were white, and 33% of the recommendations. So, yeah, I mean, there is overrepresentation. Like I say, this image, you know, this as the first year, going back to when the district started the similar work in middle and high school, those gaps were a lot higher the first year of, you know, middle school access to advanced, high school access to AP and ACE and IB and whatnot. And there's been a lot of growth in pulling those more in alignment over the years. Again, still not where we want to be, because obviously where we want to be is the blue bar and the gray bars are equal for each of these groups.
Or higher.
Or
Looks
higher.
like it could be higher.
No,
Exactly.
Equal, no. So for the left-hand side, equal is where it has to be, because we're talking about a percentage of the population within each group. So the gray bar is the percentage of students in the district that are Black, and then the blue bar is the percentage of students in the population of recommended students who are Black. So if we are perfectly equitable within our recommendations, then 27.5% of the recommended students would be Black, 39% of the recommended students would be Hispanic, and 26.5% of the recommended students would be white. Now, on the right-hand side, the idea...
Wait, so does that mean that 32% would come down to 26.5 in the white students?
Yes.
Oh, that's what you're saying,
Right.
okay. I'm just
Because-
making sure
But
I'm
it wouldn't
understanding.
lower.
It's not a zero-sum game.
Okay,
It's
that's
just looking at the data in two different ways. So the right-hand side is the access. The right-hand side is the one where we want everything to get as close to 100 as we can, because that's more and more access for students. So if every one of our students is getting recommended for advanced or advanced with support, then those blue and green bars on the right-hand side would be this total 100%. There would be no mustard, there would be no red, right? If that were the case, then these bars all here, the gray bar and the blue bar would be equal. So it's access on the access on the right, equity on the left. And so the idea is to increase the bars on the right, approaching 100%, again, equally across. And if that were to happen, then the bars on the left become equal, and the
Gotcha.
recommended kids, the population of recommended kids look exactly like the population of rising sixth graders.
Got it.
And again, in terms of the equity piece, that becomes the goal.
The last thing I'll say is this is about recommendation and access, but it doesn't show yet those that actually successfully matriculated through the program, right, and was successful with support.
So
Performance.
the
right?
performance side of things we look at separately.
Well, because there is, it is the case that students, Black students, get into courses and then drop out of the courses or decide not to continue because they're the only one. That's my research shows that. They're not going to stay if they're the only one
The
because there's a
isolation.
lot of isolation. So at some point, we should see if these recommendations are multiple students and if they are being successfully supported. So when it says advance with support in the blue, it should also say advance with support in the green, so that students are feeling supported through the program.
So, and I could take this back to the principal supervisors. The green is basically, this is a student who can succeed in advance with no additional help. The blue is, maybe this child needs a push in, maybe they need a pull out, maybe they need a supplemental instruction piece. So I think that's the reason for that differentiation, is to identify who's going to go into, advanced language arts and just do advanced language arts, and the other one who's going to need advanced language arts with a AVID course or some kind of support otherwise. So I'll pop through the last two sides, then we got it by the other areas as
Yeah,
well.
and I just want to say, we have been working on acceleration for years. Our dashboards are getting more developed with the light we're shining on this. And as Mr. Hodgson said, those gaps were wider before. And then we're drilling into each school. So each school, and then how do we get to each student? And what I always preach is we got to take human behavior out of this, because that's the ones that are causing the problem. We got to get more data and the support and put the kids in. And we've seen tremendous improvement. If you were to drill into like school by school, that's when it gets really interesting. Fascinating stuff, but we're not going to stop, obviously, until it's equal. Sorry.
Why not? And to your point on the students coming out, we actually look at this as kind of a trajectory through the year. So the scheduling process starts in March-ish, right? And so we start, as the course requests start coming in late April, early May, we start reporting these data to the schools and the principal supervisors based on the course requests. So is the school lobbying students and encouraging students to enroll. Then in mid-July, when the schedules actually start getting put in, we flip over from requests to actual enrollments. Then we track that, in July, usually sometime around the first, pre-planning week, and then up through the 11-day count. And then we hit it again at the end of first quarter, because we know, to your point, some kids start coming out at that point. And then the process starts itself over in January, where basically whatever we look like for this year in January becomes the baseline for next year. So to address these students who are leaving maybe not through their own volition, we track at multiple points through the year, so that if a school was, let's say a school was really doing really well on the 11-day count and then not doing well at the end of first quarter or the week after first quarter, that raises a question for the principal supervisor. So we do that to try to keep that, well, we let them in and they got out type of thing. So again, this is the data we've been looking at more historically. This is the middle school students with access to an advanced level course or a high school level course. As you can see on the right-hand side, our access has improved over the years. 68% of our Black middle school students had an advanced course last year, compared to 73% this year. Hispanic 67 to 74, white 84 to 87. And then on the left-hand side, you can see the bars aren't equal, but they're closer to equal than, the elementary recommendations, and they're a lot closer to equal than they were when we started. And I know we're kind of crunched for time, so again, this is the same data for ELL, FRL, ESE, and then here's high school enrollment in AP, IB, ACE, or dual enrollment.
A question from Carrie?
No, I wanted to see if he had the same data for students with disabilities and English language learners, but he went through a little bit quick, but he did have it.
I know we're a little pressed for time, but I'll share the deck with Mr.
No, that's
Oswald,
fine.
and then if you guys have any questions, you're welcome to email me.
Yeah, no, thank you, that's right.
So again, these are college level courses, so obviously the enrollment's a little bit lower than the advanced, but again, roughly speaking, a 5-point increase for black students, 6 point increase for Hispanic students, and again, 6 point increase for white students. So again, work to do on the equity side of things here as well, but again, the gaps are lower than they were when we started, and I think that's the message here is we're not where we want to be, but we're moving in the right direction. I know we rushed through those last couple of slides, but anything on those? If not, I will turn it back over to Mr. Oswald.
Any questions from the group? Seeing none, okay. Ms. Poso, I'm just going to jump into.
Please do.
Sunshine Law, and I thought I had it. Oh, yes, I do. Paul, can you stop sharing on that one?
Stop share.
This is just easier for me to do from here. Where's the meeting? Okay, thank you. It's great. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. So attached to the invite, you had information about Sunshine, and Bruce Harris is our resident expert on Sunshine. However, I know we've had some turnover in individuals. Some of you may have received a more formal training. Some of you may not. But I just wanted to provide this presentation, and if the group feels they need a full, we can add it on for a future agenda if you feel you need training in Sunshine. But it's really important for you all to understand that as a school, because of the Sunshine Law and this being a school board advisory committee, that you fall under that. So you each, on items that are coming forth that will be discussed and possibly recommendations coming from, that you cannot talk to each other about these items and have those sidebar type conversations or work through a third party to have these conversations. So I love the font that Bruce uses here. Don't communicate with other committee members outside the public meetings about matters that may come before the committee. There's a lot more. There's a manual that's hot linked there that you can pull up. There are consequences for violating this should someone challenge that, obviously, and it's against the law. And the same thing about the written correspondence can also violate the Sunshine Law. So emailing or texting with others that are on this particular committee. So this is somewhat a reminder to you all if there's any specific questions. And Ms. Poso, I'll leave it to the group if you all feel if it's necessary to have Mr. Harris or Ms. Morgan to go through at a future meeting in much more detail on this. If you're not sure that you understand the Sunshine Law and what that means, we can certainly bring that forth. But if, at minimum, I ask that each of you kind of review and go through the presentation. It's pretty self-explanatory, so that you are comfortable in following the law. No pressure. I'm gonna keep you all
Any
honest.
question for Mr. Oswald?
That was easy.
I think it's a bit self-explanatory.
Yeah. Okay. And so then into next meeting, so for November. So we kind of had discussions to make sure consensus around bringing the bullying topic and allowing the staff to kind of unpack the bullying piece to this group for the next meeting. And kind of give you our statute, again, what we do, the different types of the way we address this, because it's a big chunk of information.
Keith, is it, do you think that it would be helpful or beneficial to have, I don't know his name, the PD director, Mr. Doherty, Anthony Doherty, to come and introduce himself and talk a little bit about his role?
We can certainly invite Mr. Doherty. He's always a pleasure to hear from. Yes, we can definitely, I can put that under my updates for him to introduce himself.
Please. And then I see recommendation of the DDEC policy, and I probably, did you go over this when I got kicked off and I was trying to connect back on? There's a unfinished business recommendation
did
of the
go through that.
DDEC policy. You went through it?
Yes.
Okay. And then agenda topic for November will be bullying. And will there be any updates regarding policy 5.20? Or we said quarterly. There was an update. We said quarterly.
I can work that in, though.
If you can. And then lastly, I know I said that we will talk offline, but I just wanted to clarify earlier, just to have that that conversation regarding Ms. Mendez's request where she was asking support. I wanted to, if you know, your legal can definitely follow back with us, because I guess the question is, I guess I would like clarification surrounding what this committee can do when it comes to supporting initiatives that relates to this district, because I think the motion would have been to support the naming of the school, and it would have given a way of us as a committee, as we have done earlier, to weigh in on Dr. Joaquin Garcia. So I guess I would like clarity of why we could not send that letter of support to weigh in on why we believe he should be, as that was one of the already recommendations from the, as we state the policy, I think it's 7.2.0. We're not taking away from the policy. We're not taking away from the steps that were taken in the previous policy. We're in essence supporting one of the recommendations that the committee had already brought forth. So I would like a little bit of clarity surrounding that, because around that particular piece, if you can.
Are you saying that you wanted that now or next meeting?
Well, it's going to be too late. So if you can entertain me for just a minute and tell me why we couldn't support a motion if collectively we're not violating anything regarding that policy 7.029. I just want to know for future references and collectively why we're here. I would like to know why we could not support something like that.
Before you go, Ms. Moore, I would also say my concern is if we're looking through an equity lens, then we would need to look at the whole, I haven't been paying attention to the naming, but I do know that there'll be other recommendations of names that come forward. And if there's other people who feel strongly about other names and the membership doesn't have a full understanding of what took place to get to whatever names are going to be recommended to the board, I don't think that's fair. And listen, I have no fight in this game, but I just don't know if that would be fair if there's other recommendations on the list, and the committee was unaware of that and may have strong feelings one way or the other. So that's that's my concern, as well as, so, and then the scope of what this committee's charged with
So
regarding
looking at policy 1.0971, the District Diversity and Equity Committee policy, looking at provision 3 are the authority and responsibility of the committee. And based on those, making a recommendation of a name doesn't necessarily fall within the scope of the committee's work. Now, looking at the policy itself, the naming policy, looking at equity and diversity issues that might be a part of the policy would be within the scope. Looking at the names of schools across the district in terms of diversity and equity in that, then making a recommendation based off the committee's review of those areas would fall within the scope. However, giving a recommendation or writing a letter of support does not fall within the scope of the committee's responsibilities. I do want to reiterate that there's nothing that stops committee members from speaking in support of the name, whether it's to board members, whether it is at a board meeting, whether it was at the publicly noticed committee meetings where they reviewed the names to be presented to the superintendent and the board. There's nothing that prohibits support of members, and even going before the board and saying, as a member of the DDEC, somebody who has worked with this gentleman, somebody who is in support of this, I wanted to make that as a public statement. There's nothing that stops showing support for the name. It's just the taking action on behalf of the committee. That does not fall within the scope.
And I guess my last question and final question is, if it was the committee's will to make a motion to support this letter, would that be in violation of anything? Would that be in violation? Would we be in violation if we decided, if one of the committee members made the motion for the committee to stand as a committee in support of that name? I guess that's the question. Would that be in violation of any policies or any laws that's in place or rules?
So once again, it goes to the committee taking action on something, whether it's making a recommendation or providing support. So if the motion is being made in terms of the naming of the school falling within one of the provisions in the policy, then that would be appropriate. If it is a recommendation for which name should be chosen by the board without falling into the scope of what the committee does, then that would be inappropriate.
Okay, because as I understand it, it was presented following the scope of what the committee had already put in place, and that's what she was going by based on what the committee had already established and had concluded. That's what she brought before us. But I just wanted to make sure, because I want to be clear for any future instances, whether it's naming of the school or not, what this committee is, this committee's ability, and that is different from the policy of what we're doing, because I don't think there was a question to recommend. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on the abilities of what this committee can and cannot do.
And the focus was in equity, because there are 39, they say today, or 37% of Hispanic students, and zero school named after a Hispanic person. So if that's not lack of equity, I don't know what that is.
But thank you for the clarity, and thank you for your time to this committee. Are there anything else that comes before the body as we conclude today? Hearing none, we stand to adjourn at 12:04 unless I'm sorry, there was a hand. Ms. Kenny?
that was me. I just was wondering if Dr. Mendez can send an email with any follow-up actions that we can take. I know there's, I think November 2nd is the day, but if, I think that's allowed, if Dr. Mendez can email Susan and then distribute that information to us so that if we do want to go speak in support as individuals, we can do that. That's it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Any questions or comments?
Ms. Kenny, I don't know if
Mr.
did you write her email down? She put in the box?
I did, yes.
Okay.
Ms. Oswald, anyone in the room have anything else to say regarding the bearer of this meeting? Or for the betterment of this meeting?
Nothing in the room.
Okay, if that, we stand adjourned, or, Mr. Pagan is not here to do the honors.
Someone has to take his place.
We stand adjourned. You stand in place, Ms. Kenny, you adjourned?
Yes, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn at 12:05. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great day.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Thanks.